in today's session, he's going to cover how Gen AI, the much talked about topic these days, is turbocharging pharma growth. He will highlight the latest report which has been published by HFS Research, which explores the transformative impact of Gen AI on the life sciences industry. He gave us a comprehensive understanding. I know it's an upcoming topic, a topic of immense interest to everyone, a topic which will make a great impact on our industry. So without stealing the thunder or much ado, let me hand it over straight away to Tarun to take us through the findings of their study and how it is going to impact our lives in the pharma industry. Over to you, Tarun.
Great. Thank you so much. I hope my audio and video is coming through clearly.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. And also thank you for having me as a speaker today. It's an honor and a privilege to speak to the audience. And as you said, today we're going to talk about Gen AI in life sciences specifically. And I thought what we do is I'll give you a brief picture of some of the trend lines that we're seeing specifically within this industry as it relates to generative AI. And I'm mostly going to focus on some recent transformations in the space. And then we'll talk about the report. So this is a very interesting report put out by HFS. We were able to collaborate with them through this. However, the report is actually based upon inputs and findings from quite a few different providers and experts. So I thought it's worthwhile at least giving you a snapshot around what's in the report, how it was set up, so that as you go through it on your own, if you have time and you're interested to look at it in more detail, you can certainly get some more context as you look at the report. But maybe before I begin, I just want to set some high-level picture here. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Indegene, and I've been with Indegene since 2005, so a fair number of years, and have gotten to see the progression and the adoption of technology within this space, life sciences space, as it has evolved over time. And what we see is that life sciences companies tend to trail behind maybe what the state of the art or the cutting edge would be for very valid reasons. We're very risk adverse as an industry. The sensitivities to errors and mistakes are tremendous, right? We're dealing with patients, we're dealing with caregivers, you're dealing with regulatory and legislative issues, constraints. So we take those things very seriously. They are of paramount importance. So anytime there's a technology transformation, very measured steps are taken in the adoption of it. Gen AI has been an interesting effect. So we saw, it was November 22 when we saw ChatGPT kind of burst into the foray, and people are kind of excited by the art of possible. And life sciences organizations, again, were cautious in early adoption. However, what's happened worldwide is there's been some extra outside dimensions that have kicked in. So you have pressures from patients and caregivers around changing the nature of engagement. You see more rare disease, you see more specialty drugs, more personalized therapy. So the way that caregivers and patients are expecting to engage with the pharmaceutical industry is starting to evolve. And you also see a fair number of legislative and regulatory changes around the globe. Here in the US, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA Act kicking in, which is putting additional pressures on pharma to rethink how the operations are run, in some cases even rethinking the core business model. And so when you see those kinds of external pressures, then that pushes the needle a bit for the technology adoption. And that's what we've seen in our observation, is that the pharma industry is now re-examining key business processes, key areas of functioning that in the past they were very resistant to change, because you rather not change it, keep risk low, rather than bring in new technology and add risk. Gen AI has been this technology inflection point. So I'm not sure if that was a question or background noise, but so Gen AI has been this inflection point for us in evolving the way that pharma is actually running certain operations, and those business processes that in the past have been very difficult to change are now actually back on the drawing board and being re-examined. And so this has provided an opportunity for those of you in the audience that are actually looking at opportunities in Gen AI and transformation, healthcare and life sciences is a prime area for that, because you have a lot of legacy systems, a lot of legacy processes, and an appetite for change, as long as you can frame that change in a way that makes sense for the business. And that's what this report gets into. So this report talks around the dimensions that pharma companies are looking at Gen AI, how that journey is evolving, and different frameworks that are being used in order to make decisions on their investments in that space. So that's the big picture context. What I thought I'd do next is actually just bring up the report, and I'll kind of jump through particular sections, highlight sections, and talk about the high yield points in there. And then after that, we'll open it up for Q&A. But I hope that format sounds okay, or if you have something else in mind, please let me know.
Yeah, that's fine. So we will have Q&As after you finish. That's what Savi has just put in a note to everyone, that maybe they can stay muted till you finish, and they can make a note of the observations or questions they want to ask you.
Perfect. So, okay. So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and I'll share this particular window, the report itself. All right. So hopefully this is coming through, and it may not be super readable along the way, hopefully, but the charts and graphs where we're going to be looking at, we'll get the high yield points. We're certainly not going to read every line in text in here. We're just going to be jumping to some of the key themes. But what I want to do is start off just as broad context. As I mentioned, this has been a collaboration between HFS and Indegene, but in this report, you'll see insights and inputs from quite a few different players in the space, including some of our pharma partners, as well as other technology partners along the way. This it starts off by really talking about where this investment and efforts are going, and you can see from this chart below there, there's heavily tilted towards AI. In this particular survey, they separated generative AI and traditional AI, if you will. But the reality is those lines are blurred. They're actually very hand-in-hand. So the overwhelming majority of organizations are in some way actively investing in new AI methodologies to enable business process transformation. If you look at the other fields in this survey, beyond just the two AI line items, even most of those in some way support the AI initiatives. So the data platforms investments, a lot of those are centered around enabling the data to be more usable by the machine learning and AI technologies. Observability, again, tied to that. And the cloud and edge computing scenarios are also tied to that. People are trying to reduce their inference costs. So we could see by far and away the huge chunk of the technology investments driving business transformation are in this space, and generative AI is certainly leading the pack. I know I have spent, the past year and a half or so has been the vast majority of my time is working with our clients to talk about Gen AI, its impact on business processes, potential ROI, how to scale it up, all the different themes around that. And if we look at the report, we come back and try to summarize 6 observations, and I would call them maybe observational insights that we've garnered along the way. And from the time this report was created to now, these 6 hold true. Now, the level of advancement in these has certainly progressed, but these insights generally hold true. And if the overall theme here is that most of the life sciences organizations are very focused on the near term, short term opportunities with Gen AI. They need to prove that Gen AI has an impact on the business processes. Business leaders, and directors and operations folks need to convince the CFO that this is an investment worth making. So they tend to look initially for the low-hanging fruit. What are the quick wins? How can we actually quickly make a change that leverages Gen AI and show something comes out of it? And that low-hanging fruit is usually tied to productivity. So how can I make my existing teams much more efficient? How can I reduce the time to market, for a certain content piece, time to agency for a submission piece? So productivity has been the primary motive for these near-term, short-term objectives. And most of the business processes today are trying to achieve that through a human-in-the-loop type of a model. And so what human-in-the-loop it means is that you have an AI system. However, the results of that AI is still ultimately reviewed, curated, or modified by human experts. And that is done to mitigate risk mostly. So the big challenge is, how do I design a process that is increasing productivity yet still human in the loop? And so that's really comes down to scenarios such as augmentation. Can I make somebody be able to do their task in half the time of what they're used to doing it in? Or a process that in the past maybe needed 30 people to execute, can I get it down to 10 people? So a lot of those decisions, depending on the business process, are made. But we see productivity, human in the loop as kind of key implementation strategies. The decisions around what to do, what use cases are important, what kind of yield will they have, what priority do they have for the organizations, those we still see a lot of experimentation. We see a lot of piloting going on. So most of the pharma companies we work today, for example, have set up dedicated centers of excellence that help to whiteboard or list out the various use cases and opportunities where GenAI can be used. They go through an exercise to fund and invest in POCs and pilot programs. And from that, they'll actually do the calculation to determine potential impact and ROI. And then finally work on a pathway to scale those out into a larger, across regions and across brands. And that scaling goes into another level of complication for many organizations, because it's one thing to run a pilot or experiment. It's another thing to actually build something that's highly scalable and robust. And so that's where we see a lot of these partnerships come in. So working with hyperscalers, your Amazon, your Google, Microsoft, Anthropic, there's a variety of number of partners. Then there's specialty partners such as Indegene along the way, who actually can come in and help to bring in that scaling without adding more risk to the system. So these 6 dimensions between productivity, human in the loop, experimenting to determine your use cases, determining the value out of those experiments and pilots, calculating your true cost and ROI. That's actually, we'll talk about that more later, and then scaling up through the right partner ecosystem. These are the patterns that we've seen now since the emergence of GenAI, roughly 2 years ago, and these patterns continue today. Now, when I try to segment our industry, if I looked, a year ago, most organizations were in the early stages. They were in this dipping their toes in the water, if you will, and seeing what the opportunities with GenAI are, running some of those experiments in lightweight ways, but even understanding the landscape. What are the core technologies? Is it all about LLMs? Today we have multimodal models. It's about some other enabling technology. What changes organization do they need to make? Since that time, we've seen a rapid evolution down this roadmap. Today, most organizations that we talk to have moved beyond the new to town care category and moved into probably the second and third mostly, and I'd say probably the overwhelming majority towards the third, where they're actually looking at, these are the pilots we've run, this is the feedback we've gotten. We're now trying to calculate and determine the overall value impact for the organization so we can make decisions around where to invest on the scaling. And so this 5 categories of organizations, we certainly, it holds true today. And this report does a good job in outlining what these categories are, how organizations kind of fit into them. And for each of these 5 gives a framework, if you will, to help make some of the decisions along the way. So what I thought I'd do is actually zoom in on where we are seeing most of our effort today. And this, if you have the report, it's starting on page 8, where we see 2 questions come up the most frequently. How do I think about prioritizing the different use cases and opportunities I have? And even from that prioritization, how do I actually come back and quantitatively score and measure the impact and ROI, if you will, from these opportunities? So these kind of gives you a rough framework and methodology for this. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're mostly focused today on implementing a near-term, short-term opportunity. So this net present value axis that you see here on the bottom, that's basically a way for us to determine, using real world data, today's data, uh, operational metrics, people metrics, to calculate the net present value. We're not worried about the numerical value of what the future of transformation looks like 10 years from now. Someone could make that determination probably, but right now in the eminent times, we're looking at the net present value, and we can look at the level of effort, which is a moving target, right? The state of the art constantly moves, but it is determinable when you're taking a look at your use cases and snapshots of these use cases. So using that kind of guidance, then what you see here, these 4 quadrants, intuitively make sense, right? If you have something that is high net present value with a low level of effort, of course, you're going to work on that now. And, conversely, if something has lower net value and high effort, you're going to, put it on the back burner. So, but this overall guidance and these efforts or attributes you see on the left that use to determine the level of effort, this at least gives us a methodology and at least helps us focus in on, look at the short-term opportunities with GenAI. If you're trying to invest in it now for a situation that may yield an outcome 5 years from now, you may be making a mistake. The state of the art is moving so quickly. The technology enablers are moving so quickly, and those drivers that are coming from the outside are present today, that it makes more sense to actually think more pragmatically. And that's what our organization has been doing. Certainly on the consulting side and in thought leadership, you think about the future. In real world business opportunity, we think about what can we actually pragmatically execute today, which can achieve a measurable ROI. Then the other question we frequently get asked is to dive deeper, saying, let's look at how do I calculate the actual impact, the ROI. And so this is a scorecard. We've identified these levers that you see across on the leftmost column here that are used in determining the value. And then for each lever, there's basically a description and a numerical score that you can use to score against each of these levers, with the impact level being the modifier to talk about its impact. So using this kind of general framework, we can actually go back to each use case and quantitatively rate it compared to other use cases. So when we're looking at the overall value for an organization, pulling these levers, measuring these levers, if you will, gives us a pretty reliable and consistent framework for getting that quantitative analysis that customers are looking for. It's been a huge ask in the life sciences space. A lot of people have got instinct, and you have qualitative information, but finally, end of the day, if you're going to make investment of serious dollars in transformation and change management, having some sort of quantitative framework that you can use across the board has been a huge ask, and this report and this exhibit highlights that. Then after this, we actually get into some specific examples. So if you look down on page 12 and onwards, we start to deep dive into a variety of different use cases. And the first one is actually, we were able to mention which pharma company was involved in that. It was Boehringer Ingelheim. But the other ones, as you can imagine, were not maybe not at liberty to disclose who it was, but those of you familiar with the space may be able to figure it out. But as you go through these use cases, you'll actually see that there are some common patterns that are emerging, and it's the same as what we saw on the inside. So you'll see a lot of emphasis on productivity, reducing time to market, reducing time to agency, and finally, when it comes down to the patients and caregivers, reducing the amount of time to market for the products. So that's a big piece of it. And along the way, as you're reducing the time, you're also reducing costs. But in some cases, the cost reduction would be pretty substantial for a business process. I think the first one is at maybe close to 50%. But you also see other cases where maybe the cost reduction was in the 10, 20%. Still tangible and noticeable. But when we talk about generative AI and its opportunities, many people think about 70, 80%. There's actually bigger value in reducing the time to agency and time to market. So the total cost, the total ROI is actually different than just the headcount savings or just the low-level operational savings. So there's some good use cases here that are worth going through. They cover a variety of areas of the drug life cycle. So from the R&D clinical trial stage all the way up through commercialization, which is actually a big area of disruption right now, the amount of spend that's involved in commercializing a product, identifying which physicians should get what messages through what channel, optimizing that messages. There's med affairs in here, which is how do you deal with questions and answers, especially in a regulated environment. That's a big deal. Today, massive amounts of efforts and cost are going into these kind of support services that not only can we optimize on the cost and productivity, but we can actually make it more real time. So there are many cases where a physician or patient asks a question, they may have to wait a day or two to get a response back. Why can't they get those answers instantly using some of these technologies? And you'll see some use cases in here around that. So it's worthwhile looking at these various case stories. They not only introduce a bit more to the pharma life cycle and where some of the pain points are, but also some of the changes that were done to actually make the transformation. A few of these are works in progress. That means these are programs that have just very recently been launched, and we just have early feedback, but they haven't been fully executed yet. So we're still waiting to see the final outcomes for them. But as you go through them, I think you'll get some good insights out of it. Then I want to talk lastly about the technology piece of it. So certainly the big inflection point, and especially as the CTO of the company, I look at the technology enablers, and there's a couple of interesting trend lines happening here. One is the various business functions within pharma, they are experimenting. So they understand their business problems, they have the domain experts, they're able to experiment and find different areas to bring in some of the productivity benefits. If you go up then to the enterprise level, though, they have some other concerns. So at the enterprise level, they want to make sure that there's a consistency across all the different brands. They're worried about data privacy, data security. You're worried about traceability, auditability. So there's a number of high-level enterprise type of concerns that you want to put a platform in place for, or at least a governance platform, if not a technological platform, yet not stifle the business functions from their ability to execute and innovate. And so to this end, what Indegene had kind of realized along the way is that it's important to set up the right governance framework where you drive the standards for data access, privacy, security. You drive the standards for how GenAI is used, what models you can use. You drive the governance and standards around ethics and compliance, and those then permeate across all the business functions. And then you also provide technologically certain tools. And in our case, we've identified 3 types of tools that are being invested on from the enterprise level, but are there to help put fuel into the various business functions in terms of the innovation that those different functions are doing. So the first one is in the GenAI world, where most of us here maybe are familiar with LLMs, large language models, and some of their contemporaries. You have multimodal models, small language models, but you have these variety of models. Today, we're dealing more with agents. Agents are constructs that use those models at the core. They have memory, they have access to tools, they're able to do more. Agents almost take on the role of what humans could do to some degree. And what we have found is that having a collection of well-tuned, fit-for-purpose agents that are orchestrated and made available to the different business functions is a key enabler that can actually drive those concerns at the enterprise level while empowering innovation at the business function level. The second area is data. In our industry, we have a ton of data that's coming in. Some of it is periodic, some of it is near real time. You have a lot of data. Probably the number one issue in healthcare life sciences when it comes to data is data quality. And so using this new technology to help deal with some of those data quality issues and setting up a federated system that can actually connect to enterprise data, create a shared grammar that can be used both by the AI as well as your enterprise data systems, such as your reporting systems. That middleware, if you will, is another key enabler that can be put in place for innovation. And the third piece is the workbench. Is we talk about Gen AI being at the intersection of domain and technology. How do you make that real? How do we make sure that the domain experts, subject matter experts, can actually leverage generative AI and create something meaningful out of it? And so this workbench tool that allows non-technical subject matter experts to create these Gen AI agents and do it in a way that's appropriate for life sciences, where testing and risk reduction and validation are first-class citizens in that process. That's the third kind of investment that the enterprises can do. So these three tiers, having fit-for-purpose agents, having the right data infrastructure that resolves that impedance mismatch between the grammar used in Gen AI and grammar used in the enterprise data, and then the workbench that empowers subject matter experts to actually create these fit-for-purpose agents. These we have found as powerful enablers for our industry, and each of these is contextualized for the life sciences space. So that's another theme in this report, is the importance of setting up this right kind of technological infrastructure with the governance at that top layer. So and so that was the introduction to the report. I definitely highly suggest those of you who are interested in the space go through the report. It has a lot of good data, a lot more detail in there, and the bottom line is right here, right? That and within our life sciences space, the leaders are looking at their Gen AI investments, looking at it very pragmatically, and pragmatically because you have to make the right choices. Prioritization is key, and fit for purpose ecosystem is how you can actually ensure value as you drive innovation across the various business functions. So I know I talked for quite a bit there across the various themes, but let me maybe pause there and certainly open for questions and answers. Hopefully this made sense, and I don't know if anybody here has actually had the chance to read the report, but if you haven't, I hope that this discussion helps you get more context out of it.
Thanks, Tarun. Thanks a lot. I think we'll just open up the session for any questions or comments from our members. Yeah, Priya, please go ahead.
Hi, Tarun. Thank you so much for that. My question comes more out of a curiosity generally to understand how does industry work. Now, what I think is that, generally for organizations with big setups, dedicated teams, when you have a specialized team who has really deep dived into all these aspects, might be a little bit easier to grasp the concepts and leverage the most out of the offerings that you were just speaking about. But what I want to know from you is, how do some of the mid and small size organizations really are coping with this or absorbing this offerings that come with AI? And if you could throw some insights on what would be the best steps for small and medium companies to really gear up to maybe have this sort of aspiration 2 or 3 years down the line?
Yeah, not good question. So our experience so far with the small and mid-sized organizations, they've been pretty much exclusively focused on the quick wins. So they are looking for partners who have, you can basically think of it as off-the-shelf Gen AI enabled solutions. So they're not necessarily trying to create customized environments. They're not trying to drive R&D or extra innovation within their own organizations. What they're trying to do is come back and say, look, as a small organization, I recognize that we need to make sure that our business processes are tuned for the Gen AI world in achieving certain productivity gains, but they don't want to go in and develop new agents, for example, that are maybe highly tuned for them. So they are looking for kind of white glove services or more off the shelf systems that are proven for life sciences. One thing we have seen them avoid is generic solutions that, hey, this worked in consumer product marketing, so now you can go use it for pharmaceutical HCP engagement. They're a little bit more risk adverse, and so they're looking for partners that say, look, I have something that works for life sciences. It understands what the what are claims, how are claims validated, what is prescribing info, and how should that be in a piece of content, all this, that kind of domain knowledge, but they want it off the shelf. But they're all pretty smart. They have a lens towards the future, but the investments and the questions they ask today are very much looking for basically an off the shelf solution with some validation of being fit for life sciences.
Thanks, Tarun.
Oh,
That answers my question, but brings me up with a follow-up question. Asavari, can I ask if it's okay?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah. So Tarun, that brings me with a question. I think, I buy your point of quick wins, and I would agree logically that that would be the way to go also about the off-the-shelf kind of solutions. But does that not create a problem of fragmentation? Because at some point of time, you will have to integrate all of that, and you will have to go to the model where your source is one data. So when you build solutions that are very customized or that fix the issue for quick wins at that moment or for that particular problem, then how do you kind of see that evolving in terms of too many fragmented solutions in place?
it's a good insight, and you're exactly right that today there is no 800-pound gorilla for a life sciences Gen AI platform. It is a fragmented ecosystem that will evolve over time. The same thing happened with other technologies and platforms in the past. We've seen this with web technology, we've seen it with CMS, we've seen it with CRM, and we're seeing it again now. It is a fragmented because there is no one figured out the right answer and the robust solution. So my expectation would be what you said is exactly true. We are seeing fragmented solutions across commercial, medical, clinical, post-commercial, all these different areas, and many of those tend to be almost point solution type of solutions. We're seeing that going to evolve over time as the enterprise starts to make investments across those three things I talked about earlier. Then you'll start to see more consolidation across the board, and you'll start to see a more holistic platforms in place. I have met a fair number of companies, including startups, that are trying to become the de facto platform, if you will, so you can provide some standardization. But it's hard to back it up, right? That today to say use this platform, there's the fear that if I use this platform, I'm boxing myself out of the innovation that's coming out almost every month. We're seeing releases of new technologies in this space happen so rapidly that it's smarter to be agnostic to the technology, and even if that's at the expense of being fragmented, until this dust settles and we come back and we say, okay, looks like we are now seeing something that's more robust and scalable and deals with those issues of being missing on the state of the art. But your observation is correct, and I think it's a necessary step towards where things finally will evolve to. We're getting there. I've seen things start to narrow down a bit. OpenAI's models under Azure have kind of started to dominate more in the healthcare space. Google, with its Gemini team, at least in life sciences, is offering some competition, but they've found their niche. NVIDIA's kind of found their niche in the clinical drug discovery side. So you may have kind of three of the big hyperscalers start to bring in the core underlying infrastructure, and then once you have that, then the solution providers will start to narrow down a bit more as well. But it's still early days in this, so I think the window is wide open because of the fragmentation.
Thank you so much, Tarun. Thanks. That was very nice and indeed a food for thought. Many opportunities as well as challenges to come. But thank you, compliments to you for a very clear and very quick summing up of all the points. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good questions.
So, hi Tarun, I'm Chaitanya. I'm Digital Technology Lead of Pfizer India. Thanks a lot for this wonderful presentation. I would love to go through this report. As we all know, GenAI is one of the most exciting technology which has been there for the last couple of years, and all companies are trying to embrace it, and so are we. So a lot of pilots have been done, a lot of use cases we are looking at and all, especially in commercial space. So I just wanted to ask you one question with respect to it is used for content creation. GenAI, if it is used for content creation, then it will generate a lot of images and other content. So as of now, as per my understanding, we have to maybe validate this with the legal consortium to check whether the copyright protected. So is there anything which is happening around the world across various companies and all? Any kind of consortium is there where we can get assurance whenever any content is created, any image is contented from any GenAI tool, like any of those, whether this is copyright protected or the onus lies on the user?
Today, the onus does lie on the user, and this is actually a big concern. For example, we're working with one pharmaceutical company today where we're using GenAI to do insights and reports, and part of that process requires mining information from some public websites. So these are health authority websites. There are sites such as PubMed, other locations that we're used to. However, content is pulled from those and leveraged by the Gen AI to create content in those cases. So there is absolutely a concern about copyright violations and even permissions to access that. To our knowledge, with very few exception, there's no true clearinghouse method for permissions to these sources. So actually, in this particular case, and this is an ongoing discussion, by the way, but this particular pharma company, they've identified that these are the 10 sources that they want the AI to mine. So we have to go to each of those 10 and work out different arrangements. And what I'm seeing, it's not just in life sciences, this is a problem across all industries. Content providers are also becoming much smarter and realizing that their content is higher value. So even some sources today that are public websites, tomorrow they may become behind a paywall because they see this monetization opportunity. So we're not aware of any at least life sciences specific clearinghouse that can go and set up these digital rights. Right now, the onus is on the pharma companies to go and do that. There's rare exceptions. So like in the graphic arts space, for example, if you use Adobe, so Adobe does guarantee that whatever you create through there is handled from a copyright and digital rights perspective, but they're the exception rather than the rule right now.
Sure. Thanks, Tarun. If I'm allowed to ask one more question.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thanks. So, Tarun, my next question is around AI usage in commercial space. So, as we all know, there are certain use cases which are there to find out next best action for the reps, considering the omni-channel engagements with the SCPs, considering which are the key customers, and all this information is fed into this algorithms of this in AI tools, and it tells users what is the next best action, which HCP to be targeted when, with what value messaging. So, and there are a lot of use cases I know which are happening. Do you have any live case where it is successful? Because what I know is people are trying it out, but the data itself is not sufficient to come up with the accurate information. And as we all know, you talked about the accuracy of the model. So accuracy of the model also is questionable. At the end of the day, you talked about person in the loop. So people need to be there to take that final decision. So can you throw some light on this next best action success rate?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work in that space, and there's a couple of things. When most organizations say they have an omni-channel strategy, what we found is that that's not really true, right? Usually when they say omni-channel strategy, what they mean is a multi-channel digital strategy. But overall, holistically speaking, a company has to make decisions around what, if I have a field force, my high value HCPs, I want to have those targeted by my field force. And then out of the remaining segments of targets, you have to look at those who have a digital affinity and those that don't. And those that do have a digital affinity, you can actually go in and get more data to give you a channel level affinity. Those don't require Gen AI. So a lot of the raw data to create those insights and the analytics, that's there today. But then,
good morning.
But what we found is that where we can start to see benefits of Gen AI kicking in is when the data and insights are used together with the content library. So if I want to make, it's maybe a next best action, but I want to go and pick the right piece of content from a content repository, or if I'm authoring a personalized piece of content, then Gen AI is actually able to assist that process. And all of those are human loop. You still have a human in the process who is evaluating it, but we're able to shrink the time to market for a piece of content by greater than 50% in most cases. For example, Gen AI, using the traditional ML models for next best action, Gen AI can go in and assemble a modular content piece and can actually predict its likelihood to pass MLR, right? So before it goes to MLR submission, you can have GenAI actually score it and flag any potential issues so that you don't lose that time that of that whole rework cycle as it goes through MLR. That is certainly one area, but I haven't yet seen specifically for next best action a true omni-channel Gen AI use case, though we've done pilots and we are even actually, I think even in this report, there's an example of that in one of the case studies where we're doing that. But what we found is that most companies, large and small, have other issues that need to be resolved first before you can have Gen AI actually make a real dent in that content strategy. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about in there. So it's someone's report, and I'm happy to follow up offline with it because it is that Indegene has spent a considerable amount of time, and the bulk of our operations today are in this area, the commercial engagement. So how Gen AI impacts that, and it's not just creating content, it's the analytics, it's what the AORs do today, the strategy piece of it. So we're seeing, and perhaps your own organization, right? The shift that's going on from the spend that's going to AORs, moving that into more of the digital hub type of organizations because they can actually do a lot of the work that AORs are doing at a fraction of the cost. So that rebalancing of where the dollars go between your AORs and your digital hubs, that is fueled by Gen AI behind the scenes, right? So it's not the content creation, it's the strategy, it's the analytics that Gen AI is actually able to add some more value in.
Thanks, Tarun.
Yes, Amisha.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. So on a very practical note, let's say we are looking at an MNC from an Indian perspective, right? Can you give us, if you've already worked on some projects or use cases where we can use this capability or we kind of are using it other than medical content and probably limiting it to medical content and data? Where can we see like maximum efficiencies or, from a more execution and practical perspective for an MNC based in Indian context?
Sure. From Indegene's experience in our side in India, one area is on patient engagement. So we've seen, and these are new opportunities, but they have very clear, tangible ROI. That the ability to do question and answer as well as multi-channel patient engagement, so patient support, patient Q&A, those kinds of services powered by a Gen AI backbone has tangibly shown not only cost savings, right? So that's a big part of it, but also has been an ask from patients themselves, right? They want the more real-time impact. So at least in the India market, and what Indegene's play is certainly in that space. So those systems, they start to replace what traditional CRMs had been doing, because now with the memory and I actually call it a lightweight CDP, combining that with these Gen AI agents, they've been able to drive these digital patient engagement interfaces and applications using some novel techniques and still be compliant, still be on message, still be compliant. But that's certainly the one that comes to mind. I'm sure there are other ones that our team can cite, but on the top of my mind, I'm familiar with that one.
We have time for 2 more questions to be included. So just requesting anyone who wants to have a comment or a question answered, can please raise your hand. Yes, Ram.
I see you put in the chat. Are there any regulations that we should be aware of while using Gen AI in India? So India-specific Gen AI regulations, I'm not familiar with any that are just specifically around Gen AI. Certainly, there are constraints around messaging and social media usage where Gen AI may get plugged into. But in India itself, and maybe it's my own awareness, I'm not aware of any Gen AI specific regulations that are different than kind of general best practices. What we are worried about, especially in life sciences, without even worrying about government enforced regulations, we are very concerned about using GenAI responsibly. So having the right ethics framework, right governance controls around it, data privacy and security, it is irrespective of GenAI or not, but those kind of boundary controls we would put on any technology, and we treat GenAI the same way. Actually, let me add one point while we're waiting for another hand to go up, but and it's tied to this particular question. I do want to point out that it's when we talk about using GenAI and as you go through this research paper and you think about this industry, we come at it from the lens of solutioning and practicing. You look at it from the lens of what's our impact on patients and caregivers and the overall process around it. And from that angle, GenAI is just a tool, right? It's just another piece of technology among many others that we use within our system. And these regulations and controls apply to the system, the overall solution itself. So like in the US, we think about HIPAA, and in Europe, GDPR. So all of those controls aren't looking at GenAI. They are not looking at the language models themselves specifically. They're looking at the overall solution holistically. So I would suggest anybody here who's looking at investing and innovating and doing something for life science and healthcare, come at it from that practitioner's perspective, and work backwards and make sure that the boundaries around safety and compliance and security, all those are applied to the whole system itself. It's not just the GenAI libraries, the tools themselves.
Right. Any more comments, any more questions coming our way? If you are also able to drop them on the chat, that's fine. We'll pick up from there as well.
I see there's a question, any example most proud of impact of GenAI in pharma industry, prefer use case example from India market. So some of the ones I'm most proud of were more global in nature. So certainly India market was part of it, but not exclusively to India. One was during COVID time, the vaccine rollouts as they were happening. There was a lot of work done around how to process and identify adverse events and report those to the health authorities, and also use that to inform the vaccine manufacturers. So we used AI models, and towards the tail end of it, the early stages of Gen AI, to really accelerate that, and so we were able to process massive numbers of cases with a relatively fewer resources from in that particular program, and we did that in a pretty accelerated way. So certainly have some personal pride in working with the team to get that implemented. Other ones are on the commercial side of the equation, which also is used in India, but not exclusively in India, has been in some of the content analytics. So one of the big asks is, how do we optimize content creation by optimizing reuse? So one tactic in there is around the meta tagging of digital assets. You invest in them, you work with an agency, you create digital assets. If you tag those really, really well, then your ability to reuse them for other engagements is greatly accelerated. So there, in the past, it was very human labor intensive, and there were large teams in India that were just going through content and tagging them. We're able to augment that process to use AI to not only accelerate the tagging process, but actually do a much deeper job of that, which enabled more content, more demographics of patients, and especially true in India, to be engaged with without having to make massive new investments in content. They just found better ways to reuse it. So that is another one that was kind of global nature that I thought Gen AI had a significant impact. And that's the case where Gen AI is not creating content, it's analyzing content and creating metadata, but then the content itself may have been, in many cases, was created by human experts. They were just reused more intelligently and in better ways. I will say Gen AI usage in India for us has been a bit more limited, a little slower to adopt. Part of it is, the big models, the ones that are easiest to work with, are quite expensive in inference costs. You look at GPT-4 and 4.0, while globally speaking, they've gotten much better, but for the India market, they're still quite pricey. I think that is changing now, especially with the emergence of these much more powerful open source models. Matter of fact, I would argue that this year, probably the most significant Gen AI event was Meta's launching of Llama 3.1 405B, because it's the first frontier level language model that's open sourced and can actually be used for some fairly sophisticated life sciences use cases. That model was just launched in, I think, late July or early August of this year. So use cases that take advantage of that within the India market haven't really materialized yet, but over the next couple of months, I have no doubt we'll actually be seeing some pretty compelling stories of where that model has made a much larger impact in the India market due to its cost performance benefits.
I think, Tarun, we are on the clock. If there are any further questions, I request members to kindly. We have one. I think we have a question, so we'll probably take that as the last one. And for any other questions, we'll request you all to kindly share those with OPPI. We'll pass them on to Tarun.
Sure. Let's see. From a commercial data point, how important is it for organizations to look at a consolidated database for building more accurate models rather than working on cell phone fragmented data? Good question. I don't think it's critical to have a consolidated database. And I actually think that hasn't been a necessary piece for some time, regardless of Gen AI. We are used to working in federated environments, and in healthcare and life sciences is no different. The technology to deal with federated data has gotten much better. So those of you who are technical here may be familiar with like Trino, for example, but there are other systems, even the latest versions of Snowflake have these capabilities. So you do need to have a data catalog and a data indexing strategy that can work with the federated environment of data. That I do think is critical for this. And the next step is for Gen AI specifically, being able to create knowledge graphs against your data. So have a federated data environment, have a system that uses federated querying to create knowledge graphs and knowledge graph indexes of that data. That's a powerful asset for Gen AI. And then beyond that, having a master ontology. So if you're working in the clinical space, for example, having an ontology, and again, for those who are technical, maybe familiar with things such as RDF and OWL2, but there are formats of how ontologies are captured, curated and built. But if you're able to create a master ontology for your domain space, have in place a federated data catalog that can provide knowledge graphs and indexes across your federated data environment, that we believe is probably the most powerful way to unlock value from your data. The days of having to consolidate them into a single database or even a single data lake, I think that ship has kind of sailed, and most of us have moved on to federated data environments. So I think we're right on time there. If there's any last questions, happy to take it on, but otherwise, good set of questions. I appreciate that, and then some good insights from the team, definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tarun. Thanks for your time today. Any further questions, we will share those with you as we get them from our members. But thank you so much to you to take us through this entire report as well as your insights on answering the questions. And thank you to the members for joining in today. Have a great day ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.